There was a time, so distant it now feels like myth, when we did not question our place in the cosmos. We knew, not with books, not with proof, but with a deep, luminous certainty that pulsed through our very bones. We were divine, not in arrogance, but in origin. The soul older than time once walked the earth cloaked in memory. But something happened, a forgetting, a veil, slowly drawn over the eyes of man, until what was once a blazing truth became a distant suspicion, then a superstition, then silence. Now, we stumble through life mistaking our reflection for ourself, believing we are merely bodies, roles, routines. Hermeticism does not offer comfort. It offers remembrance. It does not soothe. It awakens. Like a whisper echoing through the corridors of forgotten temples, it tells us, you are more than you've been told. Your soul is older than the stars, forged in the same fire. What separates you from the divine is not time, nor sin, nor unworthiness. It is forgetfulness, a sleep so deep we've come to call it normal. But fragments of the old memory remain, in dreams, in moments of awe, in the pull we feel when we look at the night sky and sense something lost. The Hermetic path begins here, not with learning, but with remembering. To walk it is not to become something new, but to return to something ancient, something buried beneath layers of noise, fear, and illusion. You're not a seeker looking for light. You are the light, seeking to remember itself. And the moment you begin to remember, the cosmos remembers you. This is not mysticism. This is memory. This is the first spark of the great work, to remember that you are divine. Silence, true silence, is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something ancient, waiting. In a world addicted to noise, where even our moments of rest are filled with scrolling, background chatter, and internal monologue, silence has become unbearable. And yet, in the oldest sanctuaries of Egypt and beneath the marble temples of forgotten Greece, silence was the first initiation. The neophyte wasn't given knowledge, but deprivation of light, of sound, of distraction, until what was left was the raw presence of being. It is in this void that the invisible begins to speak. But modern ears have grown deaf, trained to chase stimulus and flee stillness. Hermeticism, however, reveres silence not as passive retreat, but as living ritual. It is the doorway to dimensions the senses cannot reach, a kind of sacred technology that opens what no key ever could. Hermes Trismegistus called it the womb of the logos, the space where the divine word is gestated before it can be spoken. Science now glimpses what the ancients always knew. Even 2 minutes of deep silence can rewire the brain, ignite emotions, and reorganize thought. But the Hermeticist goes further. He does not seek environmental quiet alone, but a silence of the mind, and deeper still, a silence of self. A place where even identity dissolves, and one becomes the listener, not the speaker. In that stillness, beyond the ego's grasp, something vast and eternal enters. Not a voice, but a knowing. And so, the Hermeticist walks among the clamor of cities, not to escape them, but to cultivate inner silence amid them. Like a priest tending an invisible altar, he listens, not for words, but for presence. Because only in silence does the true word emerge. Only in silence can the soul remember it was never separate from the divine. Before the body became a machine, measured, optimized, and objectified, it was a temple. And long before it was a temple, it was a mirror of the stars, of the soul, of the divine order echoing in flesh. The ancients walked with this awareness. They knew that the body was not something to transcend, but something to reveal. In Hermetic tradition, the body is the sacred below, the earthly counterpart of celestial patterns. The heart is our inner sun, the lungs the breath of spirit, the blood the river of memory. To treat the body with care is not vanity, it is reverence. But the modern world, in its haste, has forgotten this. It treats the body as a tool for production or a canvas for display. severed from mystery. The Hermeticist, however, reclaims the old knowing. He does not obsess over the body, nor escape it. He consecrates it. He eats as if feeding a god. He breathes with the awareness that each inhale is spirit entering form. He walks not to arrive, but to remember. For every sacred transformation requires a vessel, and the body is the first crucible of the great work. It must be pure, not in morality, but in presence. Paracelsus once wrote, "The body is the laboratory of the spirit, and the blood its mercury." In this alchemical vision, food becomes ritual, movement becomes invocation, sleep becomes surrender. Modern science is only now catching up. Epigenetics, biophotonics, vibrational medicine, all mere reflections of what Hermeticists have always practiced. The body as the bridge between matter and mystery. To live hermetically is to move slowly, to feel fully, to dwell in flesh with sacred attention. For when the fire of spirit descends, it must have a temple strong enough to hold it. And that temple is you. The mind was never meant to be a prison. Yet for most, it has become a maze, walls built from inherited beliefs, unconscious fears, and borrowed noise. We mistake this maze for truth, forgetting that the mind was once a mirror, polished through silence and inner discipline, reflecting not opinions, but reality. In Hermetic wisdom, the mind is sacred, but only when reclaimed. It is neither friend nor foe, but a neutral force, capable of revelation or deception, depending on who holds its reins. To the unawakened, the mind is a noisy tenant. To the Hermeticist, it is both altar and sword, a place where spirit is invited to land, and a blade that cuts through the veils of illusion. This is no metaphor. In the depths of Hermetic thought, the law of mentalism proclaims, the all is mind. The universe is not out there, it unfolds within. And so, to purify the mind is to polish the lens through which the cosmos is perceived. But clarity does not come by addition. It comes by subtraction, by removing the dust of distraction, doubt, and distortion. The Hermeticist watches his thoughts like an alchemist studies flame, discerning, refining, questioning. Not to control, but to transform. Reason, when guided by intuition and silence, becomes an ally of revelation. And as Plato, heir to Hermetic lineage, once taught, the soul does not learn, it remembers. The mind in this process becomes less of a library and more of a lantern. It no longer stores, it illuminates. When sharp and clear, it pierces illusion like a sword through fog. And when quiet enough, it opens, not into fantasy but into vision, a portal to higher knowing. To walk this path is not to abandon the mind, but to master it, until it becomes, at last, a mirror that reflects the divine. Deep within every soul lies a flame, silent, steady, ancient. It is not desire, which flickers and fades. It is not ambition, which bends to trends and fears. It is will, the sacred fire that once moved prophets through deserts, poets through madness, and alchemists through lifetimes of devotion. In Hermetic tradition, will is not a mere choice. It is destiny remembered. It is the soul's original command, echoing from before birth. But in the modern world, this flame is buried beneath the rubble of distraction. We are pulled in 1,000 directions, taught to obey algorithms and calendars, to respond rather than act. The Hermeticist resists. He listens, not for loud passions, but for the quiet pull that doesn't go away. True will is not forced. It calls. It does not demand applause or recognition. It demands truth. And once heard, it cannot be unheard. The Corpus Hermeticum warns, "You shall not attain the Most High while your will is divided." This division between thought and action, soul and surface, is the great sickness of our age. But the Hermeticist becomes whole again by aligning thought, feeling, and deed. Will, purified by silence and refined by clarity, becomes a sword that does not wound, but clears the way. In this alignment, even the smallest acts, how we speak, how we walk, how we listen, becomes sacred. Life ceases to be accidental. It becomes work, not labor, but the work, the great work, where every moment becomes raw material for transformation. Will is the divine compass, the spark of the all moving through flesh. And when it ignites, it does not burn, it illuminates. To find your will is to find your origin. To follow it is to return to who you were before the world taught you to forget. There was a time when life itself was a ritual, when waking was a rebirth, eating a communion, and walking a pilgrimage. Every gesture was sacred, every moment a thread in a larger tapestry woven between heaven and earth. But somewhere along the way, life became fragmented. We traded ritual for routine, meaning for motion. In the modern world, we rise to alarms, eat in haste, and sleep without rest. Yet the Hermeticist remembers, life is not something that happens to us, it is something we consecrate. Each act, no matter how small, becomes a tool of transformation when done with intention. Washing the dishes is not a chore. It is a meditation on renewal. Tying one's shoes is not trivial. It is preparation for the next step in the great work. The Hermeticist does not escape the world. He transfigures it. He brings the temple into the marketplace, the altar into the kitchen. For him, nothing is mundane. Everything is material. Joy, pain, success, failure. They are the elements to be distilled, purified, and reintegrated into the soul's evolution. This is the alchemical path, not the rejection of life, but its sacred reconstruction. In the Hermetic view, each day is a new experiment in the invisible laboratory of the spirit, and the body, mind, and will are the tools through which the work unfolds. The world may not see it. There may be no incense, no chanting, no robes. But the atmosphere changes where a Hermeticist walks. His presence reorganizes, not because he seeks to impress, but because he seeks to embody coherence. To live life as ritual is to reject the meaningless, to defy the scattered, to remember. And in remembering, to rediscover that every moment is an altar and every breath a silent prayer. The greatest journey is not across mountains or oceans. It is inward, into the forgotten sanctum of the self. While the world shouts in every direction, seducing us with distractions and noise, the Hermeticist turns away, not to escape, but to descend. This descent is not darkness, but depth. It is the ancient pilgrimage into memory, not the memory of the brain, but of the soul. In the old mystery schools, the initiate began not by acquiring knowledge, but by unlearning, by entering the inner chambers of silence, solitude, and symbolic death. And there, in that still, sacred descent, the veils began to lift, one by one. The path inward is not a straight road. It winds through forgotten wounds, hidden truths, and sacred fears. But every layer peeled away brings us closer to something eternal, the self that existed before the world named us. That self is not constructed. It is remembered. It has always been there, like an ancient manuscript buried beneath centuries of dust. The Hermeticist seeks this inner archive, not with force, but with reverence. He does not rush. He listens. He follows the trail of synchronicities, symbols, dreams. He understands that what the mystics called ascent was always a return to the origin, to the original flame. The descent inward is a sacred excavation, a recovery of what was buried beneath ego, conditioning, and time. And when the seeker touches that hidden core, he finds not just himself, but the universe mirrored within. For the great mystery is not out there. It is within, veiled in silence, guarded by memory and waiting. The world forgets, but the Hermeticist remembers. And with each step inward, he walks closer to the source, from which all wisdom flows, and to which all true seekers must eventually return. The Hermetic path does not promise escape. It promises transfiguration. At its heart lies the great work, the magnum opus whispered about in alchemical texts and carved into temple walls. It is not about turning metals into gold, but turning the self from dense, reactive, fragmented matter into something radiant, coherent, whole. In a language of symbols, we begin as lead, heavy with fear, doubt, and distraction. But within that lead is a hidden sun. The Hermeticist does not seek to flee the world, but to redeem it, starting with the raw materials of his own life. Every joy, every wound, every mundane task is fuel for the inner fire. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is too small. The great work is not found in grand rituals or dramatic awakenings. It unfolds in how one speaks, how one waits, how one chooses silence over reaction. It is the sacred art of refining consciousness until all that is false falls away. And what remains? Essence, light, a soul no longer asleep in matter, but awake within it. This work is invisible to most, and yet its effects ripple out. The Hermeticist may walk unnoticed, but his presence reorders space, reawakens memory, realigns the field. Not through power, but through coherence. For when mind, body, will, and spirit align, something miraculous happens. The individual ceases to resist the cosmos and begins to resonate with it. Life itself becomes the philosopher's stone, not metaphorically, but literally. A life lived with precision, devotion, and remembrance becomes the alchemical furnace through which the divine expresses itself in matter. The Hermeticist, then, is not the one who knows the most secrets, but the one who lives them. Quietly, fully, radiantly. He walks not toward heaven, but brings heaven into earth, lead into light, flesh into flame, self into soul. To live as a Hermeticist in a modern world is to remember what was never truly lost. It is to reclaim silence as sanctuary, the body as temple, the mind as mirror, and will as flame. It is to walk the inward path where memory becomes revelation, and to transform daily life into sacred ritual. Through each moment, each breath, the great work unfolds, not as an escape from the world, but as its quiet transfiguration. For in the end, the divine is not something we reach, it is something we remember. And in that remembrance, we become who we were always meant to be,